why sharing your grief story is the first step in healing with your child and for you. So stick around and watch this video and comment hashtag sharing to join me in a free 15-minute grief to healing clarification call where I give you the number one strategy to implement in your household this week to address grief. For those of you who are new to the group, I am Dr. Annette Athey, and I am a grief and child development expert. I've been working with children and families for over 20 years. And for those of you who are joining live this morning, if you want to comment hashtag live, and let me know that you are here. And for those of you who are watching the replay, if you want to comment hashtag replay, that helps give this video some extra love and keep it boosted in our news feed so that those who maybe couldn't watch it will get a chance to come across it in our news feed. So again, thanks for being here. So for those of you who are here, I wanted to talk about the importance of our grief story. And everybody's story looks different. And even as a parent who experienced the exact same grief and loss as our child, our experience of that event is going to look and feel very different. So, for instance, how I describe the loss of my dad and the night of the events, my children who lost their grandfather are not going to have the same details because we shielded them. They weren't there in the house when he passed away. They weren't there in the house when the police and the firemen and then the detective and then the investigator all showed up. So their experience and understanding of that evening is going to be different, even though our loss of the person is exactly the same. So I would love to know, for those of you who are here with me today, have you had a conversation or let your child tell their grief story? Or have you had a conversation to compare these grief stories? And if you just want to comment yes or no, and let me know, is this something that you have done? And maybe it's too early in the loss, or maybe it didn't feel age appropriate. But I wanted to know, have you had these conversations, or have you encouraged your child to draw a picture or write a story about the day that they lost their loved one? So again, comment yes or no. One of the things that is so important is, what is a grief story? What does that mean? So for some kids, maybe they were in the room when their loved one passed away and they watched CPR performed on their loved one. For my 2.5-year-old, she was upstairs sleeping. She didn't witness any of it. So all she knows is what we have told her. So her version of what her grief story is that she went to bed. Her dad read her story before she went upstairs to bed. And then she woke up in the morning and her dad was no longer alive and no longer in the house. That is her grief story. As simple as that sounds, but she was 2.5 at the time. And so every day, throughout the day, and especially first thing in the morning, the first thing she would do is ask for him. And so we would give her the same speech every time. Daddy has died, his heart stopped working, and she would repeat it like a little parrot. Daddy died, and you could see on her face she was trying to process and understand what that meant. Because, of course, at 2.5, she doesn't understand the permanence of death. But it was important for us to continue that broken record, to say the same thing, to not get mad or frustrated that I've told you 20 times today already. She needed the help to just continually process what this means. Again, not having an understanding or a bigger picture of what that looks like, that death is permanent. Many grief groups, if you were wanting to join a grief group, suggest you wait for 3 months. And some of you may be wondering, well, why is that? If I've lost somebody, I should be in a grief group right away. And the truth of that is that for the first 3 months, usually, and of course this varies by person, but usually for about 3 months, if you were to come into a grief group or come into counseling, most of your sessions would sound like this. I just can't believe they're gone. I just can't believe this happened. I just can't believe they're gone. And you're going to say that again over and over like a broken record, because just like my 2.5-year-old, you're trying to wrap your head around the permanence of this. And as an adult, you understand and know that they're not coming back. But it's trying to integrate that into your understanding and how that changes your whole world. So again, the grief story and why it's important is our kids need words and understanding to share with their friends, share with the teacher, share with other family members. When somebody says, well, where's your mom? They then have a story to tell or a couple sentences, and so they're not so caught off guard. The other important part of why we have a grief story is that grief should be witnessed. We shouldn't experience this grief all alone, all on the inside. We need to talk about it. By having a grief story, it becomes easier to talk about and for our kids to understand and process what's happening. And then they're more likely to share and talk about it with their friends or with family members, or even come and sit into the living room and talk with you as their parent or maybe grandparent. But if they don't know what's okay to say, or maybe some confusing things happened, for instance, let's say mom was sick. She went into the hospital. They knew she was sick, but she'd come home before, and not understanding why this time she didn't come home, and not understanding that cancer is not a sickness that you can catch. Again, these are different, just little, almost little facts that as an adult, we're going to know and just realize that cancer isn't something that's spread. But to our 2-year-old or our 5-year-old or our 10-year-old, they don't know that. That's not something they've encountered before. And so it's not necessarily a basic fact of knowledge for them. And so, again, this is where the importance of that grief story comes into place, is to help you help them process the details of what happened. And again, this needs to remain age appropriate. So with my 2.5-year-old, we're not going to go into the discussion of how her dad died of a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that went into his heart. We're just going to stick with his heart stopped. So It's very simple, it's very matter of fact. They don't have to know all the big words and terminology. And this is something that if you are struggling with or you're unsure of how much detail is too much or what's age appropriate, I would love to talk with you on that free 15-minute grief to healing call where we can talk about, maybe it was circumstances of murder or an overdose, or there were some extra details in there that you're unsure if it's appropriate for your child to know at this point. I would love to talk with you and guide you on some tips or things to say, but also from my experience in working with many families with a variety of losses. So, again, like we were just talking about with that grief story and its importance, the more this grief story is written or spoken about, and again, it's going to change over time. When the loss first happens, it's going to sound like a broken record. It's going to sound the same every time. As they get older and integrate that event into their life journey, they may have more details, or they may have a memory that is different than what you remember. I remember when my aunt passed away, and of course, as for many families, when you have a funeral, there's a lot of extended family and friends. And for those of you who maybe have a funeral and then a luncheon, that's kind of how our day went. And then all the cousins were together. And during the time when all of the cousins were together, we were all piled on the floor laughing and joking. And my mom had actually come in and took a picture of all of us. And in looking at that picture, those of us who were in our late teens all knew exactly where that picture came from. The day that it was taken was my aunt's funeral. My cousin at the time, I believe, was about 8, and his memory of that picture was here was a great time with his cousins. He did not associate that picture with the funeral day of his mom. So again, I bring that up just so you know that sometimes the details of that day process differently to children than they do to adults. So it's just something to keep in mind, and we want this event to be integrated in a healthy way, not a traumatic way, not the way where your child is so fixated on one detail or the severity of the loss that they are stuck in that development phase and they can't move past that. Our whole goal in talking with our children and helping their grief be witnessed and to have them tell their grief story is to help them process through this grief in the most healing and helpful way at their pace. So it doesn't have to be over and done and healed by the 1-year mark. It just means we're taking little, sometimes even micro steps at a time to get us to that healing, healthier spot. So for those of you who have stuck around, if you want to comment #sharing, I would love for you to join me in a free 15-minute grief to healing clarification call where I give you the number one personalized strategy for addressing grief in your household. I have spoke with several of our group members, but I would love to speak to more of you as I continue putting together our a grief talk challenge and a grief course, the more 15-minute calls that I can have with all of you, the better. It helps me know that what I am offering in this course and in this Facebook group is actually helpful, that it's what you need and what you are struggling with and wanting addressed to look differently so that your kids are moving on that grief to healing journey. So, again, thanks for all of you for being here this morning, and I look forward to seeing you in the group. If you have any other questions, please feel free to post in the chat. Bye.